Brought to you by Black Mafia Podcast.
Good afternoon, Ken. It's a privilege to have you on the Black Mafia podcast.
Absolute pleasure, mate.
You're one of the people that I've been looking at from afar, hoping that you would agree. And when I asked you, you did straight away. And I just want to start the podcast with a small section of what it says about yourself on Wikipedia, if you don't mind. It's not so much for yourself.
Lies, by the way.
Yeah, well, well, it's for the audience more than. So anyway, Ken, you was born in 1950. You were an English writer and former British soldier who has written a series of non-fictional books on the conflict in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles. The books are based on first-hand accounts by soldiers of all ranks who served in the Operation Banner campaign, as well as a number of civilians.
Yes.
And also your own personal experiences from 2 tours in Northern Ireland.
That's correct. Yes.
So that's a bit of Wikipedia. There is a lot more. I do know that you have done guest speaking, and I do know that you were invited to give a talk at Sandhurst to the officer cadets a few years back, which must have been immaculate. Yeah.
2017, and I was invited on there by one of the academics there, Aaron, and he's been a big fan of mine. I'm a big fan of his, and we've become friends over the years. And it's always a pleasure to talk to him, see him, everything. Yeah, nice lad.
Yeah, and you also gave a motivational speech to the Australian combat engineers before they went out on deployment to, I'm not sure if it was Iraq or Afghanistan.
Afghanistan,
a few years back as well.
Yes, with the late Paddy Lenihan, ex-King O.
Yeah, so
and Australian Army as well.
Yeah, so fantastic. So you are in demand. So thank you for giving me the privilege. So I'd like to start. So you was born in Leeds in 1950. So how was childhood and growing up?
Well, childhood, I was born into a working class background, like a lot of lads in the army. Born at my grandparents' house in East End Park, which is now very, very largely run down. Then across to my maternal grandparents in Sturton, and all the houses have gone there now. It's just industrial works. Then across to Seacroft to a predominantly Catholic estate, and most of my early friends were Catholics, which made the Northern Ireland thing quite ironic. And then my maternal grandfather died, left my parents some money, and we moved out to East Ardsley in the country near Wakefield, where we had a shop, which sadly went bankrupt. So by 65, we were back in Leeds. And my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. I think I may have told you this. And I was obviously caught up in it from being 4 to about 11 with not much choice. They fell away from the religion and then got back when I was 15, at that naturally rebellious age anyway. So I refused to go along with it. My brother and sister had to go along with it. But eventually I saw a refuge in the army. So I got away from organised religion. And a few years later, that I'd be stuck in the middle of a religious conflict. So there's irony for you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I believe you was in the military for about 6 years with the Royal Green Jackets, and
just under 6 years.
You did a couple of tours in Northern Ireland, and then you found yourself out the military in the early 70s. So where did you progress to? Or what did you do as a...
I was married to my first wife, so we just sort of got on with life, and she helped subsidize me through A-level college. I did 2 years A-level course in 1 year, and then got a place at Warwick University. After Warwick,
done.
It was into selling. I needed a car, and it was the only legitimate way I could think of getting one. So I went into a career in sales, and I stayed there for over 40 years before emigrating to Australia, 2008. And I worked out there for the Australian government, and then started writing, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. Okay. So, what was the initial spark to write about Northern Ireland, the Troubles? I would say the conflict, but it's word salad, isn't it? So what gave you the spark?
Well, you might be right. It might be word salad, but I know it as the Troubles. Anybody
Yeah.
who was connected with that era in time, 69 to 2008, also views it as the Troubles. So I see no harm, Duncan, in you referring to it in such a way. What was my spark? Well, I'd just been made redundant from a job, and I'm sort of late 60s, late 50s, and I can't see any sort of future for me. So whilst I was looking for a job, I started writing, and my main motivation was that once I came out of the army, every week, nearly every day, the news was coming through from Northern Ireland. Another British soldier had been killed, a group of British soldiers had been killed, policemen had been killed. And it seemed to me as though we'd become war weary as a country, and people refused to let me talk about Northern Ireland. And I wanted to get our story out there because currently there wasn't. You know, we've got plenty of stories from ex-provisional IRA, ex-Ulster Volunteer Force, etc., etc. And it was only their side of the story coming out. I wanted our side of the story to come out. So one day, sitting at home on my own, my partner was out at the hospital where she was a nurse, and I just started writing. I wrote Forgotten Voices of Northern Ireland, and that was my
Yeah.
provisional title. And I didn't really stop for another 20 years, I believe.
Yeah.
That was my motivation, to get our story across, get our side of history told, because nobody was doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was a little kid in the early 70s, and it even touched me because I'm lying in my bed 6 miles away from the city centre of Birmingham. I'm age 7 or 8, and I heard a bomb, and the bomb was the Birmingham pub bombings, and
Yeah.
I didn't know the ins and outs or what had happened. I just knew that it was a grave day in the city of Birmingham, and even up till now, the present, the Justice for 21 is massive in Birmingham. It's led by the supporters of Birmingham City and Aston Villa predominantly, because no one else will pick up the tab, and it really left its mark, even as me as a little boy. Like, it left a little scar because I didn't know what that explosion was that night until years and years later, when I actually found out from other people and got educated myself what it was all about, you know.
Well,
And
I was up in Leeds at the time when it happened, and I can't remember whether I was home on leave or whether I was gone by then, but I didn't hear it other than metaphorically. It was a blast. You know, they talk about shots in the American Revolution as shots heard around the world. Well, I certainly believe the Birmingham pub bombings. I think it was the talk of the town and the Mulberry Bush, and there was a
yeah,
failed
that's
one.
right.
Yeah, and there's a failed one at Yates's Wine Lodge, which had it detonated, the death toll would have been far more than the 20 odd that it was. Would have been far more. And
Yeah,
that explosion was metaphorically heard in Leeds and many of the cities in the UK. And it was a shocking time. It really was a shocking time that people, as it happened also in Northern Ireland, would go out for a quiet night out or a noisy night out, but a night out where they could do what they wanted, within reason, have fun, talk to their friends, laugh and joke, get over the week's work, and their lives were cut short because of a cowardly decision by the IRA Army Council in Northern Ireland. And it was part of their, if you like, their sordid and squalid murder campaign to sicken the British public into putting pressure on the then British government into withdrawing from Northern Ireland. And the resistance amongst the British politicians was admirable, and they were not going to be bombed out of a part of the United Kingdom. But yes, it was definitely a sound heard a lot further away than the bull ring in Birmingham.
Well, the years after in Birmingham, the actual suspicion, and there was beatings throughout the city for a couple of years after, because there's a massive Irish community in Birmingham, and it didn't matter. Religion didn't matter. If you had an Irish accent and you was from up in the north, it didn't matter if you was Protestant or Catholic. They all got beatings because it was a lack of education and also frustration. Whether it's right or wrong, it's not my place to judge, but the fallout was tremendous. So yeah, I mean, that's my little bit before I actually joined up and went there myself in the early 80s.
Duncan,
Ken,
I think
yeah,
you're
sorry.
wrong. I think you're wrong because it is your place to judge. Yeah, it's our place to judge. There were terrible times, and there was no difference between putting a bomb in a crowded pub and going and shooting somebody in the head in the street. And it is your place to judge. You should always be judgmental over things like that, because how can you be objective about murder? And their squalid and sordid murder campaign was just that. So you are right to judge. I have no problem with that.
I think what I said was taken out of context. It was probably the way I described it. I don't mean the actual killings and the murders. I mean the 2 years after of the beatings of anybody in Birmingham. Whether that was right or wrong, I can't make a judgment on that because of lack of education, lack of history. But the actual murders themselves were just abhorrent. Yeah, of course, disgusting.
If I can introduce an analogy to support what you've just said, when Hamas invaded Israel and carried out a systematic slaughter on that day in October 2,000 years ago, Hamas knew exactly what was going to happen. They knew that Israel would retaliate, that civilians would be killed. And it was the same in Northern Ireland. The IRA knew exactly what would happen. They knew Irish civilians would be targeted. They knew there would be a backlash, and they then could turn around and say, like Hamas said, we're your protectors, we're your defenders. The IRA did the same thing. We're your protectors, we're your defenders, because the British, the English are thugs and mindless hooligans, and they will take it out on you. The IRA stroke Hamas knew exactly what they were doing. They were being agent provocateurs in also creating a campaign of terror. They were agent provocateurs. They knew exactly what the repercussions would be. And that was, in my opinion, very, very cynical.
I can't argue with that at all, Ken.
No.
I just want to come forward a little bit. So you've done your first book on the Troubles.
Yes.
Because you wanted to get information and first-hand accounts of what you'd seen and what was going on. So what about the second book and the third book? Well, what was the where did you find the strength and the discipline to do the second and the third book?
Well, the first one was easy because I'd been made redundant. I was at home. In addition to the bedroom for myself and my then partner, we had a study, spare room. I would just go in there, continue working. I then found a job working in York, and I'd already started on my second book at that stage. It just became addictive. You know, what can I tell you, Duncan? It was addictive. I'd started to get the story out. I'd got some critical acclaim, which incredibly flattered me because I didn't think that I had the ability to write articulately. So the second one just followed on from there. That was Bullets, Bombs, and Cups of Tea. Again, it was just based on soldiers' experiences, but the support I got from ex-comrades, from the media, the support was so flattering, and that support that I got just gave me fresh heart, and after that, it just became addictive. You know, you find a niche in life, you find an ability that you didn't think you had, and you just continue doing it. So the spark from the first one was bitterness and anger that our story wasn't getting out there. After that, it became addictive. People were supporting me. Hundreds, and I mean literally hundreds, of former soldiers wanted me to tell their story. And then eventually became civilians who were involved in the conflict who want me to tell their story also. So where does one stop? You know, it was addictive.
Like you almost become a beacon of light. You may not be like being told this, but credit's where credit's due. I mean, I remember crossing paths with you about 12 years ago, and I had a little bit of a story, and you put a shout out on various groups on Facebook for any incidents because you was for a new book from Northern Ireland, and I had a bit of a story about my fellow rifleman, and that was the first time I had contact with you, and I believe you chased him up eventually because the queue was huge. I mean, so many people look to you for inspiration to get their own little bit of history out, which I can't thank you enough. And I can't thank you on behalf of my friend who was probably thank you anyway. I did a podcast with him 2 months ago, and through when he told you his story, and then through the podcast, he's got so much closure on what happened to him that it's benefited him. And you know, we all appreciate what you do. We really do.
Well,
you know,
I do love flattery, of course I do, and I'd be a liar if I didn't say that I didn't enjoy being complimented. But I said to you earlier, that kind of support gave me fresh heart. And I do remember once writing as a young soldier to John Pilger, South African journalist. Not everybody's cup of tea, but he had the courage of his convictions. And I wrote a letter to him, and he wrote back and said to me, "It is support like yours which gives me fresh heart." And I've always, ever since I started writing, I've worked on that mantra. And it was your support and Darren Ware's support, Kevin Stevens' support, and all those other people, Ken Ambrose, the late Ken Ambrose. It was their support which gave me fresh heart. And I listened to every single story, and there was only one that couldn't go in. And I can't tell you the reason why it couldn't go into the book, but the publishers wouldn't allow it. You know, it was unsubstantiated. It was something I actually believed was correct, but the publishers wouldn't allow it. But other than that, every single story that anybody's put to me, given their side, our side of the story of the Troubles, has gone into my books. And I'm always open to receiving more contributions, and I will never turn anyone away. If anybody's version doesn't get into the book, that's not as a consequence of a decision by mine. It could well be the Ministry of Defence, who were very savage in the initial censoring of my works, and the publishers. So I was grateful for your help. I will continue to be grateful for your help, and I would be grateful for any future help from anyone.
Yeah. Just going back a tad, the Troubles, I don't think it's a strong enough word. I actually think it was a war.
Of course it was. Of course it was.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that out there off my own back. It's just something that's just come to my mind, and it's. I mean, I don't know the full stats, but was it over 1,000 service personnel?
Right. Well,
Murdered?
according to, sorry to cut you short there, Duncan.
No, it's fine. Yeah, you're cool.
According to the MOD, it was 700 plus, but all they included were deaths from direct terrorist activity. Now, in any war, when anyone is killed, they're dead, whether or not it's as a direct consequence of enemy activity, or whether it's just an accident. And there were so many people killed have been killed in any conflict, in every conflict, that wasn't just down to an enemy bullet or an enemy mortar or an HE shell. I identified 1,473 deaths in
Wow.
as a consequence of the Troubles. And some of those were what the MOD compelled me to call death by violent or unnatural causes. I wasn't allowed to use the word suicide, but there were so many deaths, double the official MOD figure. And this included, may I give you specific examples?
Yeah, of course you can. Fire away. I mean, the viewer will be,
I won't tell you the name of the regiment, okay? But there was an incident where one of the soldiers in that regiment was having an affair with another soldier's wife. He refused to end it, and the soldier, the wrong soldier, the offended soldier, saw his love rival on the phone in the company office just after the wrong soldier, had come back from foot patrol. And instead of going to make his weapon safe, as you know, it meant cocking the weapon, taking the magazine off, cocking the weapon 3 times, and firing into a sandpit. He didn't. He fired in through the company office window and shot the man dead. That was his revenge. And there have been enough incidents where people were killed by their own comrades, either as a consequence of them going, mad, doolally, as the old British Army would have said, or just through mental illness, or through pure accident. These people deserve to be known on our roll of honor, because they wouldn't have died had they not been there. So my opinion, and the Northern Ireland Veterans Association's opinion, was if a soldier died in or as a consequence of the Troubles, and you can't tell me that suicides were not as a consequence of the Troubles. Even if somebody got a Dear John letter, he was there in Northern Ireland. The balance of his mind was disturbed by the things he'd seen and heard. And I think those people should be rightly honoured and named within our roll of honour. So I identified 1,473. A colleague of mine, former UDR, they've actually, I think they've identified over 2,000. And if you look at the Ulster Defence Regiment, the UDR, they had over 300 deaths on active service. They had as many again through suicide, through accidental shootings, even through road traffic accidents. And I believe these all contributed to the death toll in the Troubles. And I think they're rightly, by myself and by Neva, they are rightly recognised as dying as a consequence. And whereas the MOD and the British press want to sanitize it by saying it was only such and such a figure, I believe, and have believed since I began writing, that toll, that roll of honor, is twice what officially it's made out to be.
Just going back to the UDR, were they classed within the British military figures, or did they try to keep them separate?
No, they're classed within. I mean, they're part of the army. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
part of the army. They served the same as you and I. They had a number, a service number. Most of us began with 223. I was a 24. I think you were. Were you a
2-4.
24? Right,
Yeah, I was.
right up to
Yeah.
the 25s. If you had a military number, you were part of the military, and rightly so. And
Yeah,
you,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
yeah, I include them with the rest of the British Army because, as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, there's no distinction.
Okay. A bit of a personal question for you, Ken. What's your feelings on the Ministry of Defence?
Well, the Ministry of Defence, I think they have a tough problem. They have a tough job. I think they're constantly trying to be diplomatic, be politically correct. And my first two books were savaged, not in the sense of a criticism, but they were savaged by their censor department, because I think my publishers put my first 5 books to them, and they didn't like the fact I didn't refer to the casualty visiting officers. And we all know what a great role they had to play. So that
Yeah,
prompted
yeah.
into, doing a piece on CVOs. They didn't like the fact I'd used suicide. They wanted me to use violent or unnatural causes, and they asked me to take out things which I knew contravened ROE, contravened rules of engagement, particularly at the vehicle checkpoints, VCPs. They felt that I was giving far too much away, and that were the Northern Ireland conflict to arise again, or a second conflict to arise, that I would actually be putting information into the hands of the DRs, the dissident Republicans. And I actually obeyed every single thing that the MOD asked me to do, and I made sure that I didn't use the word suicide. And I would refer to some of the more controversial deaths in a subdued manner. But they did not like the fact that I was not contravening ROE, but giving information on rules of engagement, on operational conduct, etc., that a future dissident Republican campaign might take full advantage of. I think they were just covering their asses, to
Yeah,
be
I think
really
so.
honest,
Yeah,
and trying to be politically correct. And I found it
yeah,
hampered me a bit until my publishers stopped taking any notice of the MOD, which was a
yeah.
novel way of doing it.
Well, fantastic to your publishers. I mean, just quickly, I had some dealings with the MOD because I claimed a war pension, and
Yes.
they blamed my PTSD on my childhood, and I thought, well, you don't know what happened in my childhood. And
Yeah.
then it dawned on me, actually, the MOD have had 500 years of training and recruiting people, and they know what they're doing, and they're not silly.
Yeah.
And just for the viewers' benefit, on my YouTube channel, I've got the Imperial War Museum were very good to me and gave me the privilege of using some of their video, which was fantastic of them. And I've got a film up of the Royal Marines in the 1960s being administrated LSD and going into the field to do tasks.
Yes, I've seen that.
And if the MOD are going to do that, I think the MOD could do whatever they like, really,
Yeah.
and then make it up as they go along. But it's all about opinions, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're rotten, but I don't think they're very good for me, because they knew I came out of Birmingham. They knew I was dragged up, and they knew what regiment to put me in because they've had 500 years. But that's another story, Ken. I do apologise.
No, please don't apologise. And just as a little aside, I was actually removed from the Imperial War Museum a few years ago on one of my trips over from Australia. And I criticised the fact that they'd removed all sorts of things that could possibly offend anybody, including a blitz experience where you could sit in an air raid shelter and they would simulate an air raid attack. They'd remove just about everything to do with Northern Ireland. And I said, what you've done is you're sanitizing Northern Ireland for the sake of political correctness. And I kicked up a bit of a fuss. I referred to them as being a shadow of their former self. And I was asked to leave the museum. And I've
Do you
not
know,
been
I
back.
wasn't aware of that. I was not aware what you
Yeah,
just said.
I was
That is
asked to move by,
disgusting.
yeah, somebody on reception. I can't remember his name, but he didn't like the fact I was kicking up a fuss. And I asked them why there wasn't anything in the library about Northern Ireland, including my own books. And they didn't like my attitude. I wasn't particularly rude. I was angry, but I wasn't particularly rude. But I was asked to leave, and I've not been back since. And it's a pity because in its
Yeah,
heyday, the Imperial War Museum was the finest in the world, and it was
yeah.
my favorite museum. But they suddenly became politically correct. And one thing
Oh,
I'm not,
it's a
Duncan,
shame.
is
Yeah.
not politically correct.
I think, if you don't mind me saying, I think Northern Ireland veterans shouldn't take it too personal, because my own dad fought in Malaya,
Yeah.
and he fought in Aden, which is now Yemen stroke the United Arab Emirates. And he spent 2 years in the Aden, and it
Yes.
was full on kinetic. I mean, he was in the tank regiment, and I've read some of the history of what the 4th Tank Regiment, what they did out there. And in one engagement, they got through 20,000 rounds of Browning ammunition on the big, the American Brownings they had issued to them.
Yes.
So it was very kinetic stuff. And yet, Aden, not talked about, no one knows about it. Malaya, same again. Ireland's gone down the same route, and so's the Falklands. And I think Iraq and Afghanistan will eventually go the same way. It's almost as if,
We're becoming too politically sensitive.
yeah,
You know?
we're embarrassed. Not
Yeah.
us, but the establishment's embarrassed.
Well, do you remember?
Yeah,
Do you remember the poem by Rudyard Kipling? It's Tommy
yeah,
this and Tommy that, and kick him out the
yeah,
brook, for it's
yeah,
savior of his country when the
yeah,
guns begin to shoot. And I think that's still the case now. It was in the case when we all wore red coats and formed up in squares before the Green Jackets came along, obviously, in
yeah,
1740 as the
yeah.
Royal Americans.
That's it.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. And it's always going to be this and Tommy that, and kick him out the brute. That's never changed, Duncan. I don't
yeah,
suppose it ever will.
yeah. I want to bring us forward a little bit to your books haven't been wrote with any type of agenda, in the sense that you're not fighting for the Protestant side, or the, against the Catholic side. You're, I know you've got no love of the IRA or the INLA, but the
None
other side,
whatsoever.
what's your take on the other side, the Red Hand Gang, the UVF, people like that?
Well, as I've said many times, and I've used the term in my books, to the extent that a lot of lads have said, what does this word mean? I don't just despise IRA, IPLO, INLA. I hold the same equal opprobrium. It's a word I've been questioned on a number of times. I hold the same equal opprobrium for anybody in paramilitary uniform that is carrying out a squalid murder campaign. And that includes the Ulster Volunteer Force. And I'm not referring to the original 1913 one, or those that fought with the Ulster 36th Division in the Great War. I'm
Yeah,
talking the modern paramilitary members, terrorists. There's no other word to describe them. The murders carried out by people like Johnny Adair, Chinky Bratty, Stephen Top Gun McKeague, Stephen Inch McFerrin, and all those others of the Red Hand Commandos, the
yeah,
UVF, the UFF, right? I hold them in the same equal opprobrium.
yeah,
I would tend to have sympathy more with the Protestants, but I will support equally any member of any religion that is seeking to either live a normal life or effect change by peaceful means. And that didn't include Bratty. It didn't include the Glenanne gang. It didn't include Johnny Adair or any of those. And they were as equally culpable as were Jerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, Sean Kelly, Darky Hughes, and all the others, the Price sisters, all of the others, McGlinchey, people like that. They're equally culpable. I hold them in the same contempt, and I regard them with the same opprobrium.
I mean, they were just gangsters out there. I mean,
they were.
The kneecappings that went on. I mean, just from afar, and when I was out there in the early 80s, I was a kneecapping yesterday. There was one today. There's two yesterday. I mean, they were like, they were kneecapping apparently their own side for like silly things.
Of course,
they're just gangsters. Like, and they ran all. Like, I remember the intel was saying that they were not just doing terrorist activity, but they were running the drugs. They were running all sorts.
You know, Duncan, what I've always said, and I've written in my books, that had it not been for the Troubles, some of those Republican terrorists and some of the loyalist terrorists, and I'm making a distinction between a unionist member, loyalist member, and the paramilitaries. I'm making that distinction. So this is not a dig at any Protestant or any loyalist or unionist. It is at the paramilitaries. And I think, had it not been for the Troubles, there were people on the Republican side and people on the loyalist side who would have still been gangsters. There'd have still been pedophiles. There would have still been rapists. They would have still been thieves. They would have been violent psychopaths. And the evidence is that without the Troubles now to sate their proclivities, if you like, the modern day gangsters in Northern Ireland are former paramilitaries, and they've been engaged in drug dealing, in protection rackets, in people trafficking. This is going on now without the Troubles to give them an excuse to vent their proclivities, their perversions, if you like. They've just reverted back to being what they always were, and that is gangsters. And there's
monsters
no
and gangsters. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just, I mean, I served out there in the early 80s, and it was a 6-month tour the first time. And I went out there and I listened to the old sweats of the regiment saying about the early 70s. And it was, whether you was in Derry or Belfast, it was Dodge City every single day. And but when I got out there, I didn't expect that. But our tour was actually very, very, very kinetic. We had about 6 shooting incidents in the 6 months. But we also had things like, the big thing at the time in the UK was joyriding.
Yes.
And when we got out to Belfast, you set up a VCP and everyone was joyriding. And some of the lads I was with had itchy fingers because there's a car coming towards you at 60, 70 mile an hour.
Of course.
So, like, and we had one or two fellas that emptied an SLR mag into the back of a car, thinking his life was under threat. And
that takes some doing to expand 20 rounds.
He didn't even hit, and we were supposed to be riflemen as well. Yes. Excuse me. But no, but this was going on, and I scratched my head. Why joyride in Belfast at that time, especially in West Belfast, especially at that time? It just flabbergasted me. I mean, geez.
Duncan, you've only got to look at the Lee Clegg story, right?
Yeah.
He either panicked or felt his life was under threat, but he was pilloried. He was pilloried by the press, the media, by those nice people in Sinn Féin. the shared space and mutual respect, Sinn Féin. He was
Yeah.
pilloried by those people, and those kids were the ones that tried to run through the VCPs were just insane, and what the motivation was, I don't know. Greater
No.
minds than mine have not been able to understand the death wish those people had. But if I was in a car and I was approaching, a checkpoint, I could see soldiers with red torches flagging me down, or armed, with SLRs or SA-80s, I would slow down.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
I
But
can't
it was different.
wish.
It was different times and different circumstances, and maybe they were used as a patsy for something else going on at the time. It's just, as a kid, to come from Birmingham and join the army and go out there and see half the stuff, it was just mind-boggling, as a young lad. And yeah, it's still shocking now, some of the stuff. I mean, top cover getting bricked and petrol bombed.
Yeah.
It's just, and like you said, some people, when it's 6 months and you got 4 days off in that 6 months and every single day is the same, it does take a toll on your mental health. There's no two ways about it.
Duncan, the other day, I was taking my partner's pet to the dog. Pet to the dog? Pet to the vet. Dog to the vet.
Yeah.
And as I was driving along Street Lane in Leeds, quite an affluent area, I saw a car being driven at incredibly high speed. It was a Range Rover. Speed limit on there is 30. I would say, based on my 50 years of driving, he was doing probably 60 to 70 miles an hour. And I swerved to get out of the way because he went straight for me. And a second or two behind him was a police car, flashing lights, sirens, everything. So not so much a joyrider as maybe a car thief, but just thinking back, imagine if there'd have been a vehicle checkpoint in front of that with armed men there,
Yeah.
His driving was suicidal, really suicidal. Imagine how much more dangerous it would have been confronting, a patrol of armed lads. Absolutely insane.
Yeah. Like, and it's only as I got older as well, I think back, and I've also had discussions with Iraq veterans and Afghanistan veterans. How, as we get older, I think most of us, or a large percentage of the military or the ex-military, however you want to say it, we all get a little bit liberal. I don't mean liberal Democrat. I mean liberal in our thinking. I mean, if I was 20, I'd hang them higher, and I really would have. But I look at things a bit more better now, and I take a back step and weigh it all up. Whether that comes with age or just becoming a bit of a liberal, I don't know.
I think it comes with age, mate.
But I want to touch. Yeah, possibly. So I am coming up towards an age, I want to touch on something, and I've left it to the last. How do you feel about what's going on with? Well, it was Northern Ireland veterans, but they started on the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans now, and with they're saying crimes, because I did a podcast with a rifleman the other day who had Special Branch knock on his door a few years ago about a shooting incident in Ireland. And my mate just slammed the door in their face, and they haven't been back since. But I reckon that won't be the last of it.
No.
How do you feel about what's going on up at the top echelons of the government coming down towards people that have served in active places?
It's not a difficult one, to be honest. When the Belfast Agreement was signed in '98, and I don't blame Blair for this, he was desperate for peace. And nor do I blame Mandelson, nor do I blame Mo Mowlam for trying to get the best deal possible. But I think where they've left us a lasting legacy is of, look, it's ended now. We got out of it. We got the best deal we possibly could. Let's just get on with things. But what we don't want the IRA bombing London again. We don't want any of those £1 billion bombs. And I think that when the Good Friday Agreement or the Belfast Agreement was signed, there was always this fear at the back of the British government's mind that because we knew that the IRA and the UVF had not totally decommissioned their arms, their weapons, their explosives. We know that. Adams himself,
Yeah.
This is Jerry. I was never in the IRA. Adams, right? Said they've not gone
It's so
away.
comical.
And I believe, I can't prove it. And in a court of law, I couldn't stand up and say this is the case. But I believe that a lot of the weapons are still in caches around Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, just waiting to be used again. And there's an old adage, one bomb in London is worth 10 in Belfast. And I think the British government, whatever party is in power, Labour, Conservatives, whatever party is in a position of power, at the back of their minds is, we don't want another £1 billion bomb in the city. We don't want another Canary Wharf or Threadneedle Street or Manchester Arndale Centre. We don't want that. We can't afford that. So we will bend over backwards to help Sinn Féin and all their former terrorist members to assimilate themselves into society. We won't say anything when they go to any sort of political excesses. We don't want that to happen again. But if a soldier comes along and we can prove that he fired a round at a joyrider on the Ballymurphy estate, then we'll get him into court and we'll show Sinn Féin and all the others that we're trying to be fair. And by bending over backwards to be fair, it's gone too far the other way. And Sinn Féin know they can do no wrong. And us as former soldiers, we know we can do no right. And that is just one of the unfortunate consequences of the Good Friday Agreement. We wanted a relative peace and we were prepared to pay any price for it. And the price we're paying now is Sinn Féin can do no wrong, we can do no right. I don't know whether you'd agree on that.
I'm absolutely raging and savage on this because, okay, Sinn Féin can do no wrong. Leave them to it. If that's the way it's gone, but why on earth? I am raging that people are getting knocked on the door. People in their 60s and their 70s are getting people. I mean, it's absolute.
Well, let me give you an example, Duncan. About 9 months ago, I got a demand from Belfast Coroner's Court to appear to give evidence on the so-called Spring Martin massacre. I wasn't on Spring Martin at the time, but I did interview 3 soldiers, all of whom now are sadly deceased, who gave me the stories of the alleged massacre, but certainly the shooting. And there was far more to it than met the eye. And on the strength of the fact that they'd given me in confidence their stories, which I'd published, the Belfast Coroner's Court demanded that I appear. When I filled in the questionnaire and every single answer was negative, and there was a lot of criticism of Sinn Féin solicitors, Sinn Féin barristers, who are on this big gravy train at the moment, and they've got this mentality of, let's sue them now. Let's get as much money as we can out of the British government. I refused to go. I refused to go there, and they emailed me a few times, and then they gave up. But I'm not going to be browbeaten by those provisional IRA legal teams, nor Belfast Coroner's Court, and it's not going to end. It is not going to end, and we have to resist this, because it's not, you know, this might sound like I'm some sort of pampered, spoilt kid, but it's not bloody fair. It is not. That we went through what we went through and we're being punished, but the real guilty people, you know, the ones that planted bombs, shot soldiers in the back, shot people in front of their children in their homes, that these people are getting away with it. And that makes me bloody angry.
Absolutely. It's just the fact that I joined up in the army to get away from my own father. That was the main reason. But also the second reason was all my family's been in the military since the 1850s, in one form or another. So it was expected almost. So, and when I went to Belfast or wherever you go, whether it's just to part of NATO in Germany or Canada or wherever you're going, I went there to do the best of my ability and do the job I was trained for. And I didn't go there with any other sight to commit crime or to like, and I'd say that, you know, not off the top of my head, 90% of what went on in Ireland, Northern Ireland, with soldiers was spur of the moment decisions, which I don't think. I mean, we could spend all day on this, and I still wouldn't get anywhere, and I'd be so frustrated. And I haven't had a drink in 5 years, and I'd probably have a couple of brandies.
You know what? I've not had a drink since last night. I'm 8 hours sober.
Well, fantastic. Yeah. So
before we finish, Duncan, before we finish,
yes,
can I just mention a few members from the regiment who I'd like to pay tribute to? I can't pay tribute to them all, but Dave Judge, Darren Ware, yourself, of course, Dave Walters, Dave Hardy. Just like to say a mention to them. They were great help. Kevin Stevens, great help. Yeah. And I'd like to pay tribute to those lads and all the others that helped me. Yeah,
well, you know, you are a beacon for thousands upon thousands of ex-veterans.
It's nice of you to say that, Duncan, but I'm not a beacon. I'm just like you. I'm just like the rest. I'm proud of that. I'm not a beacon. If people come to me and they want me to write something, yes, I'm proud to do that. But I'm not a beacon. I'm just the same as you, mate. Exactly the same as you. But thank you anyway.
Well, I'm going to beg to differ, because you put your head above the parapet and you've put 13 books together on something that is close to thousands of people's hearts. And so thank you. Your books, I know that I've had a look. Ken's books are on Amazon. They're in Waterstones, all the best bookshops. Also, I will edit and put all your books up onto the podcast.
Thank you, mate.
Because they are good reads. I will apologise. I've only read 2.
Terrible. That's terrible. How dare you?
But 2's better than a kick in the nuts, as they say. But I will get round to doing them all. It's one its time, but the 2 I've read have been amazing. You're a top bloke, and there's one last little question which I've asked all the other people who've done a podcast with me.
I'm not lending you any money.
Okay. Have you got any words for anyone that's struggling at the moment in whatever field they're in life or whatever they've done in life, but they're struggling?
Are we talking financially or emotionally?
Emotionally more than anything else.
Emotionally, you know, we all of us to a certain degree suffer from PTSD, whether it's mild or major. And with me, it manifests itself by, I can find myself crying, you know, for no reason. And it might be triggered by Northern Ireland. It might be triggered even by the Second World War, even the trenches, right? And all you can do is hope that you're surrounded by people who love you, who support you, you know, and that you in turn put yourself in the same position and help and support others. There's no cure-all. There is no cure-all. All you can do is live every day, and start every day afresh, and believe in yourself. And you really have to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
I'm not a
Love yourself
psychiatrist.
first.
I'm not a psychologist. I found strength in love and support, and I hope that every single lad or even lass who has those kind of emotion problems has some support group. And never be frightened of your feelings. Never be frightened of going to people for help, right? Because that's what it's all about. If you're ex-British Army or ex-Royal Navy or ex-Royal Air Force, you've got a support group. You've got the people that serve with you, the people that served after you, the people that served before you. They're all there to listen. And if that person is not there to listen, they're not worth the salt.
Yeah. Fantastic words, Ken. Fantastic words. And I think, because I'm of the same opinion, and I think a lot of viewers will, I don't think this will be the last time, and I think there'll be a part 2 to this if you come back one day.
I would be honoured, and I'm serious. I would be honoured and delighted to go.
Thank you very much.
Yes. No problem at all, mate. My absolute pleasure.
Yeah, well, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Ken. Much appreciated.
Okay, mate. You take good care. Talk soon. And anytime you want to chat or do another podcast, you just say when.
I will do, bruv. All right, then. You take it easy. Bye-bye.
All right. All the best, mate. And it was an honour and a privilege.